Abstract. Princess Vespera von Grimm of the Twilight Reach prefers gloom, silence, and black coffee. When she wakes up with the glowing, soul-bound mark of the Betrothed to the Sun Heir of Solaria, her life turns into a blindingly bright nightmare. Fleeing her home to scrub the mark off, she stumbles into a rigid captain of the Paladins, accidentally erases a healer's childhood memories, and infiltrates a palace full of people who think darkness is a dirty word. Between fake fathers avoiding taxes, charming necromancers, and a prince who is annoyingly attractive, Vespera must survive the bridal trials without revealing she is actually the princess of their sworn enemy. Vespera von Grimm, the youngest and arguably most cynical princess of the Twilight Reach, woke up with the sensation that someone was hammering a copper nail into her temple. It was a Tuesday, usually a day reserved for brooding in the library and criticizing the weather, but today the universe had other plans. As she sat up, pushing aside the heavy velvet curtains of her four-poster bed, a sharp, searing pain burned across her collarbone. She stumbled to the mirror, her vision swimming. There, pulsing with a nauseatingly cheerful golden light against her pale, moon-touched skin, was a complex rune. It wasn't just any rune. It was the mark of the Sun Heir's betrothed. "No," Vespera whispered, her voice cracking. "Absolutely not. I refuse." The mark pulsed brighter, as if mocking her denial. In the Twilight Reach, shadows were currency, and sunlight was a myth told to frighten children. To be marked as the soulmate of the solar heir, the future king of the blindingly bright, painfully righteous kingdom of Solaria, was not just a diplomatic incident, it was social suicide. And worse, it clashed horribly with her entire wardrobe. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. If her father, King Moros, saw this, he would either execute her for treason or, worse, actually try to marry her off to secure a trade route for luminous moss. She couldn't risk it. 10 minutes later, Vespera was sprinting across the cobblestone courtyard, a travel cloak thrown over her night rail. She burst into the stables, startling the stable hands, and made a beeline for her father's favorite stallion, Midnight. The horse, a massive beast with a coat like spilled ink and a temperament to match, snorted as she vaulted onto his bare back. "Sorry, Dad," she muttered, gripping the mane. "I'll bring him back. Probably." With a kick of her heels, she thundered out of the castle gates, leaving the eternal gloom of the Reach behind. Her plan was desperate but simple. Ride to Solaria, find a rogue mage who operated in the back alleys, and pay them to scour this tattoo off her skin with acid if necessary. She would rather be scarred than married to a man who probably glowed in the dark. 2 days of riding brought her to the borderlands, a gray zone where the eternal twilight faded into a harsh, unyielding daylight that made Vespera squint constantly. Her head pounded, she was hungry, and Midnight was beginning to look at her with distinct judgment. She tied the horse outside a roadside establishment called the Drunken Goblin. It was a crooked, timber-framed building that smelled of stale ale and roasted onions. Pulling her hood low to hide the traitorous glow on her collarbone, Vespera pushed through the heavy oak doors. The tavern was rowdy, but the noise died down instantly as a group of men in gleaming white armor stood up from a center table. They radiated authority and an annoying amount of hygiene. Paladins. The Lightbringers. Vespera groaned internally. Of all the taverns in all the borderlands, she had to walk into a recruiting station for the righteous. At the head of the group stood a man who looked like he had been chiseled out of marble and self-righteousness. He was tall, with broad shoulders and hair the color of spun gold. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. He was Captain Lucian, and even from across the room, Vespera found him unbearably correct. He looked like the type of man who flossed 3 times a day and rescued kittens from trees just to lecture them on climbing safety. Vespera tried to skirt the edge of the room toward the bar, but fate, having already ruined her morning, decided to ruin her afternoon too. A commotion erupted near the hearth. A woman in healer's robes was clutching her arm, wailing. "It's the venom," one of the paladins shouted. The griffin pecked her right in the artery. Lucian was there in an instant, his face grave. We need to stabilize her, but we used our last potion on the road. Is there a mage in the house? Silence followed. Vespera bit her lip. She should keep walking. She really should. But the woman was turning a shade of green that clashed with the floorboards, and Vespera, despite being a princess of darkness, wasn't a monster. Oh, for the love of the abyss, she muttered. She stomped over to the group. Move over, tin cans. Lucian looked up, his blue eyes narrowing as he assessed the hooded figure. You have medical training? I have enough, Vespera snapped, kneeling beside the healer Elsa. She placed her hands over the wound. She needed to be careful. Solar magic healed by accelerating life. Shadow magic healed by pausing the damage and stitching reality back together. It felt different, colder. Just hold still, Vespera commanded. She pushed a pulse of magic into the wound. She pushed too hard. The tavern plunged into momentary darkness as the shadows from under the tables surged toward her hands. Elsa gasped, her eyes going wide and completely black for a second. The wound knit together instantly, vanishing without a scar. Vespera pulled back, panting.
Done.
She's fine. Elsa blinked, sitting up. She looked at her arm, then at Vespera, then at Lucian. A serene, empty smile spread across her face. Look at the pretty light, she cooed, pointing at a candle. Is it nap time? I want my teddy bear. The tavern went silent. What did you do? Lucian asked, his voice dangerously calm. I healed her, Vespera said defensively, standing up and dusting off her knees. You wiped her mind, Lucian accused, stepping closer. She thinks she's 5 years old. Well, the infection is gone, isn't it? Priorities, Captain. Vespera turned to flee, but in her haste, she tripped over a loose floorboard. Her cloak snagged on a chair, sliding down her shoulder. The mark of the Sun Heir flared brilliantly, illuminating the dim corner of the tavern like a flare. Lucian froze. The other paladins gasped. Lucian's eyes dropped to her collarbone, then snapped back to her face. The suspicion vanished, replaced by a look of profound, bureaucratic shock. The mark, he breathed. He reached out, grabbing her wrist before she could adjust the cloak. You are the chosen. I am a tourist, Vespera lied, trying to yank her arm back. That's just a rash. A very bright rash. That is the royal seal of the Solarian bloodline, Lucian stated, his tone brooking no argument. He looked her up and down, noting the travel-stained clothes and the general air of desperation. You are running away. Why? None of your business. Let me go. I cannot, Lucian said, tightening his grip. It is my sworn duty to protect the future queen. I will personally deliver you to the Radiant City. I don't need delivering. I need a dermatological exfoliation. Vespera shouted, but it was no use. The paladins were already surrounding her, looking at her with reverent awe that made her want to vomit. The journey to the Radiant City was a test of Vespera's sanity. Lucian insisted she ride in the center of the formation, for her safety. He rode beside her, his posture so perfect it made her back ache just looking at it. You have raw potential, Lucian said on the second day, as they navigated a narrow mountain pass. But your affinity is chaotic.
Dark.
We must cleanse it before you meet the king. My affinity is fine, Vespera grumbled, slouching in her saddle. It has character. It erased a woman's knowledge of algebra, Lucian countered. Now, focus on the sunlight. Feel its warmth. Let it fill you. If I let it fill me, I'll get a sunburn on my soul. Their bickering was interrupted by a low rumble. The rocks above them trembled. Suddenly, boulders the size of carriages began to rain down. But they weren't just rocks. They uncurled into massive, granite-skinned trolls. Ambush! Lucian shouted, drawing a sword that glowed with white fire. Protect the lady. The paladins formed a circle, but the trolls were relentless. They smashed through the defensive line, scattering the horses. Lucian was fighting 3 at once, his blade a blur of light, but he was being pushed back toward the cliff edge. Vespera watched, her heart hammering. She couldn't use solar magic. She didn't have any. But she couldn't let Mr. Perfect fall off a cliff. She felt a familiar tickle in her nose, the buildup of heavy, pressurized shadow magic. It was a reflex she had suppressed since childhood, a forbidden biological reaction of the Shadowborn. She took a deep breath, inhaling the darkest shadows of the ravine. "Captain! Duck!" she screamed. Lucian, to his credit, dropped instantly. Vespera sneezed. "Acho." It wasn't a normal sneeze. It was a sonic boom of pure darkness. A shockwave of twilight energy blasted from her, hitting the trolls with the force of a battering ram. The monsters were lifted off their feet and hurled backward, smashing into the canyon walls where they stuck, glued by sticky shadows. The dust settled. Lucian slowly stood up, brushing dirt from his pristine pauldrons. He looked at the trolls, then at Vespera, who was wiping her nose with her sleeve. "Did you just sneeze them into submission?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's a medical condition," Vespera sniffed. "The shadow sneeze. Very rare. Deadly to boulders." Lucian stared at her. For a moment, the mask of the perfect soldier cracked, and Vespera saw a glint of amusement, or perhaps terror, in his eyes. The tension between them shifted, becoming less about captor and captive and more about two people realizing they were stuck in a lunatic situation together. He looked at her, really looked at her, and Vespera felt a treacherous flutter in her stomach. He was annoying, yes, but he was also very brave. "We need to work on your sneezing technique," he said finally, sheathing his sword. "But, thank you." When the radiant city of Solaria finally came into view, Vespera had to shield her eyes. The entire city was built of white marble and gold. It gleamed so brightly it hurt. "I can't go in there like this," Vespera panicked as they approached the massive golden gates. "I look like a scarecrow that lost a fight with a chimney." "You look adequate," Lucian said, which was high praise coming from him. "However, protocol dictates I must report to the barracks first. I cannot escort you directly to the throne room without clearance." He stopped the convoy just outside the main gates. "Go to the guest palace. Show them the mark. They will understand. I will join you as soon as I can." He looked like he wanted to say more, perhaps apologize for kidnapping her, but he just nodded stiffly and rode off with his men. Vespera stood alone at the gates of the enemy capital. "Right," she muttered. "Plan B, lie to everyone." She pulled her hood up and marched to the side entrance, where a haughty steward stood with a clipboard. "Name," he droned. "Lady Vespera," she said, lifting her chin. "From Backwater. It's a small duchy. Very rustic. You wouldn't have heard of it. Purpose of visit?" Vespera lowered her cloak just enough to flash the glowing tattoo. The steward's eyes bugged out. He bowed so low his nose nearly touched the pavement. "My apologies, my lady. Right this way." She was whisked through corridors of blinding opulence and deposited in front of Madame Broach, the royal mistress of etiquette. Madame Broach was a woman who looked like she had been starched along with her collar. "Lady Vespera of Backwater." Broach sniffed, looking at Vespera's dusty boots. "And who is your father, child?" Vespera's mind raced. She couldn't say King Moros. "Count Fint. Count Fint of the Cloudy District. He's very shy and elusive." "I see," Broach said skeptically. "Well, the mark is genuine. You will be housed in the Amethyst Suite." The Amethyst Suite was beautiful if you liked rooms that screamed royalty at you. But Vespera was more interested in the large oak wardrobe. In stories, wardrobes always led somewhere. She opened it and tapped the back panel. "Hollow." She pushed. The panel slid open, revealing a dark, damp stone passage. "Finally," she sighed, relaxing in the familiar gloom. "Some proper architecture." She crawled through, emerging into what looked like a hidden observation deck overlooking the royal gardens. And there, standing by a fountain, was Lucian. But he wasn't wearing his armor. He was wearing the heavy, embroidered velvet robes of the crown prince. A servant was placing a circlet on his head. Vespera gasped, clamping a hand over her mouth. Lucian wasn't just a captain. He was Prince Lux, the Sun Heir, the man she was betrothed to. "That lying, manipulative, gorgeous jerk," she hissed. She scrambled back through the tunnel, tumbling into her room just as the door creaked open. A short, stout man with shifty eyes and a mustache that twitched like a nervous rodent slipped inside. "Who are you?" Vespera demanded, grabbing a heavy candlestick. "I am Count Fint," the man whispered, bowing rapidly. "I heard you needed a father. I am available for hire. Reasonable rates, and I provide my own backstory." Vespera blinked. "You want to pretend to be my dad? For a tax exemption, I will be your grandmother," Fint said. He scurried closer. "But listen, daughter. You are in danger. The selection isn't just a beauty contest. The anti-shadow faction wants you dead. They know the Mark chose someone unconventional." "Great," Vespera sighed, putting down the candlestick. "Fake dad, secret passages, and assassination plots. Just a typical Tuesday." That night, Vespera couldn't sleep. The air in the palace was too still. She wandered down to the royal greenhouse, hoping the plants might offer some oxygen that didn't smell like lemon polish. The greenhouse was a jungle of bioluminescent flora, but the tranquility was shattered by the clash of steel. In the center of the fern grove, a young woman with fiery red hair, Rosa, another candidate she had seen on the guest list, was cornered by 3 men in black masks. "Mercenaries! Leave her alone," Vespera shouted, instinctively throwing a ball of condensed shadow. It hit the nearest mercenary in the face, blinding him. The other 2 turned on her. Vespera realized too late she was unarmed. Suddenly, the shadows near the roses elongated and sprang to life, wrapping around the mercenary's ankles. A man stepped out from behind a large fern. He was dressed in black silk, pale as death, with eyes that glittered with amusement. Now, gentlemen," the stranger drawled, flicking his wrist. The shadows tightened, hoisting the mercenaries into the air. "Interrupting a lady's evening stroll is terribly rude. I should kill you, but I don't want to get blood on my new boots." He gestured, and the shadows threw the men through the glass roof. They vanished into the night with fading screams. The stranger turned to Vespera and bowed. "Damian Wood, necromancer, poet, and currently the most bored man in this city. And you must be the mysterious lady from Backwater." "You're a necromancer in the Holy City?" Vespera asked, eyeing him warily. "I'm here on a diplomatic visa," Damian winked. "And to annoy the priests. You have a nice hook with that shadow spell, by the way. Sloppy form, but excellent enthusiasm." Vespera, Prince Lux, no, Lucian, burst into the greenhouse, sword drawn, followed by guards. He took one look at Damian, then at Vespera. "Damian," Lux growled. "Stay away from her." "Just saving your fiancé, oh luminous one," Damian smirked. "You really should keep better watch on your guests." Lux glared at Damian, then turned to Vespera, checking her for injuries with an intensity that made her blush. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she said, pulling away. "Just a bit of light exercise." The next morning, the first trial began. The great hall was packed. In the center stood the Orb of Sincerity, a giant crystal that pulsed with truth magic. Each candidate had to touch it and answer a question from the high priest. The other candidates, standard princesses from neighboring realms, gave textbook answers. "I want to bring peace." The orb glowed polite blue. "I love kittens." The orb glowed soft pink. Then it was Vespera's turn. She approached the orb. It hummed aggressively at her. "Lady Vespera," the priest intoned, "what is your deepest desire regarding the crown?" Vespera put her hand on the crystal. She tried to lie. She tried to say, to serve the kingdom. But the truth magic hooked into her brain, bypassing her filter. "I think balls are torture devices invented by people who hate comfort," she blurted out, her voice amplified by the magic. "And right now, I would trade this entire kingdom for a really good ham sandwich with extra mustard." The hall went dead silent. The orb paused. Then, it exploded into a blinding, ecstatic rainbow of colors. It pulsed with a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like laughter. "Authenticity detected," the priest announced, looking bewildered. "Highest score." Lux, sitting on the throne beside his father, covered his mouth with his hand, his shoulders shaking. Damien, leaning against a pillar, gave her a thumbs up. But the orb wasn't done. It spun, shooting beams of light into the crowd, highlighting 3 other women. Additional dark candidates detected for balance. The mechanical voice of the orb boomed. The light fell on Morgana, a goth princess filing her nails, Helga, who looked like she wrestled bears for fun, and Lilith, who was reading a book on poisons. The light, Court gasped. The selection had just become a lot more interesting. The debutante ball that evening was a disaster of epic proportions. Vespera was shoved into a dress that felt like an Iron Maiden disguised as silk. Lux approached her for the opening dance. He looked regal, intimidating, and annoyingly handsome. "So," he whispered as he swept her onto the floor. "A ham sandwich?" "I was hungry," Vespera hissed, trying to follow his lead. "And you, your highness. Why didn't you tell me you were the prince? Would you have come with me if I had? I would have ridden my horse in the opposite direction." "Exactly," Lux smirked. Vespera retaliated by stepping firmly on his foot. He didn't even flinch, just spun her faster. The chemistry between them was palpable, a mix of irritation and attraction that sparked like static electricity. As the music ended, Damien cut in. "May I? The prince looks like he needs to ice his toes." Damien danced with a fluid grace that was entirely unfair. "Run away with me," he whispered in her ear. "We can overthrow this shiny ant farm. I have an army of skeletons. They're great listeners. I'm not looking for world domination, Damien. Just a way out." "Pity. You'd look great on a skull throne." Later, seeking fresh air in the park, Vespera was ambushed. Helga, the candidate who looked like a barbarian warlord, stepped out from behind a statue. "You're making a mockery of us dark princesses with your sandwiches," Helga growled. She began to chant a curse, green fire gathering in her hands. Vespera didn't wait for the spell to finish. She stepped in and delivered a solid right hook to Helga's jaw, followed by a pinch of dust of confusion from her pocket. Helga staggered back, the magic fizzling. What spell was that?" "The Fist of Reality," Vespera said, shaking her hand. "Highly effective. The second trial. Intellect." The candidates were seated before Archmage Pippin, a man so old he looked like a dried apple in a wizard hat. The challenge was to debate the nature of magic. One by one, the candidates recited boring treatises on how light was the source of all good. When Vespera stood up, she was tired of the propaganda. "Light without shadow is blinding," she argued, pacing the floor. "It burns. It reveals without concealing. It is a desert at noon. Shadow is rest. Shadow is the cool breeze. A world of pure light is just a boring light bulb that you can't turn off. You need the contrast to see the picture." Archmage Pippin frowned, then squinted, then rubbed his temples. "But the texts say—" "The texts were written by people who are afraid of the dark," Vespera countered. "If you have a coin, one side is heads, the other is tails. You can't have a one-sided coin. It's physically impossible. Therefore, your entire magical theory is geometry deficient." Pippin's eyes crossed. He let out a low moan and slumped onto his desk. "Migraine," the proctor shouted. She gave the Archmage a migraine with logic. Trial passed. Vespera sat down, feeling smug. Across the room, Lux was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't annoyance anymore. It was respect. And maybe something deeper. But the victory was short-lived. As the candidates were dismissed, a messenger ran in, pale and breathless. "The third trial," he gasped. "It's to be held on the Isle of Mists." A murmur of fear went through the crowd. The Isle of Mists was untamed territory. Damien leaned over to Vespera. "Careful, princess. The Isle is dangerous. But not as dangerous as the people watching you right now." He nodded toward the gallery, where Count Fint was arguing with a group of severe-looking nobles. Vespera touched the glowing mark on her collarbone. It was warm. She looked at Lux, who was already issuing orders to the guards. The game was changing. The comedic misunderstandings were giving way to real danger. And Vespera, armed only with her wit, a fake father and a forbidden sneeze, was right in the middle of it. The Isle of Mists was exactly as advertised, wet, gray, and smelling faintly of mildew and impending doom. The candidates were dropped off by a grumbling ferryman, surrounded by a perimeter of royal guards. The objective was simple: retrieve a golden apple from the center of the grove. Vespera was already shivering, wishing she had packed thermal socks, when the air shimmered with a distinct lack of hospitality. For the pure beam, a voice shrieked. From the fog, figures emerged. They weren't magical constructs. They were fanatics. The Pure Beam sect, radicals who believed shadows should be illegal, had bypassed security. They wore blinding yellow robes that hurt Vespera's eyes and wielded jagged crystal daggers. Ambush! Helga roared, summoning a battle axe out of thin air, but the cultists were too numerous. They overwhelmed the guards with flashbang spells, blinding them. The Dark Princesses were encircled. Lilith, the poison specialist, tried to cast a smog cloud, but a cultist deflected it with a mirror shield, searing her arm with reflected light magic. Lilith cried out, clutching the burn. Right, Vespera snapped. The panic vanished, replaced by cold, royal anger. I am done being a tourist. She stepped to the front of the trembling group. Ladies, close your eyes. Things are about to get weird. Vespera raised her hands. She didn't just pull on the shadows, she twisted the fear in the air. Illusion of the nightmare carnival. The fog turned blood red. The trees twisted into looming, skeletal clowns with razor-sharp teeth. The sound of a distorted calliope organ blasted through the clearing, playing a nursery rhyme backward. The cultists froze. One of them screamed as a spectral juggler began throwing flaming skulls at him. Another dropped his weapon, sobbing, as the ground turned into a giant, laughing mouth. Psychological warfare, Vesper muttered, sweating from the effort. Classic. The leader of the sect, a man with crazy eyes and a beard that had seen better days, resisted the illusion. He charged at Vespera, screaming about cleansing the smudge. Oh, shut up, Vespera growled. She didn't have enough energy for a combat spell, so she improvised with raw transfiguration. She pointed a finger at him and channeled all her frustration about the uncomfortable shoes she'd been wearing for weeks. Zap! The leader vanished. In his place stood a gnarled, mossy tree stump. You have the right to remain silent, Vespera panted, leaning over the stump. Because you are wood. This is an outrage, the stump squeaked. I am a maple. I demand to speak to a lumberjack. Suddenly, a roar shook the remaining leaves off the trees. A golden dragon descended from the clouds, landing with an earth-shattering thud. On its back was Prince Lux, looking frantic and disheveled, his crown crooked. He slid off the dragon before it even stopped moving. Vespera. He saw the unconscious cultists, the sobbing fanatics, and Vespera standing over a talking stump. He didn't ask questions. He didn't lecture her on protocol. He strode forward, grabbed her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of adrenaline, ozone, and relief. The Dark Princesses cheered, except Morgana, who rolled her eyes. The royal guards awkwardly looked away. You're alive, Lux breathed, pulling back but keeping his forehead against hers. I thought. I'm fine, Vespera said, her knees feeling dangerously wobbly. But I think I turned a terrorist into patio furniture. I see that, Lux said, glancing at the stump. My bark is itching, the stump complained. Damien Wood strolled out of the shadows, clapping slowly. 10 out of 10 for dramatic tension. He walked up to Vespera and slapped a silver bracelet on her wrist. What is this? Vespera asked. A cute accessory, Damien grinned. Definitely not a high-grade GPS tracker enchanted with necromantic locators, because I don't trust the security around here. It goes with your eyes. The fourth trial, the ancient WIRM. After the incident on the Isle, the atmosphere in the palace shifted. Vespera wasn't just the girl from Backwater anymore, she was a contender. The fourth trial took place in the volcanic crags of Mount Cinder. The objective: survive an interview with Gornik, the ancient three-headed dragon. Listen to me, Lux whispered to Vespera before she entered the cave. Dragons have an ancient feud with the von Grimm bloodline. Your great-grandfather stole Gornika's favorite hoard of chew toys. If he smells your blood, he will incinerate you. Be careful. Vespera swallowed hard and walked into the cavern. Gornik was massive, his scales the color of dried blood, smoke curling from his 3 snouts. He lowered his head, sniffing her. I smell Twilight, the middle head rumbled. And fear. And are those peppermint mints? Vespera trembled, then noticed something. The dragon's scales were dull, covered in soot and ash. His claws were overgrown. He looked miserable. The fear evaporated, replaced by the instinct of a horse girl who couldn't stand seeing an animal neglected. You look absolutely disgraceful. Vespera scolded, hands on her hips. The dragon blinked all 6 eyes. Excuse me? Look at this scale rot. When was the last time you exfoliated? Vespera marched up to the terrifying beast and began picking soot off his flank. And your claws. They're splitting. You're not a monster. You're a mess. Sit still. Well, the caves are dusty, the left head mumbled, looking embarrassed.
No excuses.
Lift your paw, Vespera commanded. For the next hour, the terrified audience outside watched via magic crystal as Vespera treated the ancient scourge of humanity like a naughty puppy. However, Morgana, watching from the wings, wasn't having it. She's cheating, the goth princess hissed. She flicked her wand, sending a stinging hex into the dragon's sensitive underbelly. Gornik roared in pain. His eyes turned red. He thrashed, his tail smashing a support pillar. He lunged not at Vespera, but at a serving girl who had been bringing water.
No.
Vespera shouted. Paladins rushed in. Mages cast shields. In the chaos, Baroness Clara, a minor candidate, screamed. My father paid the cultists to kill her, not me. Save me. The fighting stopped. Everyone looked at Clara. Oops, Clara squeaked. She was escorted out by guards, still ranting about her non-refundable deposit. Vespera patted Gornika's nose. Good boy. We'll get you some moisturizer later. The autumn ball and the swamp. To celebrate the survival of the candidates, the king threw the autumn ball. Vespera, wearing a dress the color of a stormy sky, felt Lux's eyes on her all evening. Thirsty, my lady. A waiter offered a glass of sparkling lemonade. Thanks, Vespera said, downing it in one gulp. 3 minutes later, the room began to spin. The chandelier looked like a giant spider. The floor turned into marshmallow. I think I need to lie down, she mumbled, pitching forward. She didn't hit the floor. Strong arms caught her. But they weren't Lux's. They were rough. And they smelled of bog water. When Vespera woke up, her head felt like it was stuffed with cotton. She was tied to a chair in a drafty, rotting wooden shed. Through the cracks in the wall, she saw endless foggy swampland. Finally awake, Sleeping Beauty? Helga stood over her, sharpening a dagger. You kidnapped me? Vespera groaned. That is so cliché. It's effective, Helga sneered. With you gone, the prince will choose me. I will become queen. And my first decree? Everyone wears black leather and fur. No more pastels. Solaria will be a fortress of angst. You're doing this for fashion? Vespera asked, incredulous. I'm doing this for aesthetic dominance, Helga corrected. She turned to leave. Enjoy the swamp rats. They get hungry around midnight. She slammed the door. Vespera struggled against the ropes.
Great.
Kidnapped by a fashion fascist. Suddenly, the wall behind her exploded. Splinters flew everywhere. 2 silhouettes stood in the hole. Knock knock, Damien said, dusting sawdust off his necromancer robes. We're not doing the knock knock joke, Damien. Lux sighed, stepping over the debris, his sword glowing. We are rescuing her. I'm the bad cop, you're the good cop. That's the dynamic, Lux. Damien waved his hand, and Vespera's ropes turned into dead snakes and slithered away. You guys tracked me? Vespera rubbed her wrists. The bracelet. Damien tapped his wrist. Never leave home without it. Outside, Helga was commanding her henchmen to attack, but they were currently busy fighting a squadron of reanimated skeletons, courtesy of Damien, and a very angry Paladin prince. Helga tried to run, but Vespera was faster. She tackled the barbarian princess into a mud puddle. "You ruined my leather," Helga shrieked. Back in the capital, Helga was dragged before the court, covered in mud. The king sentenced her to the royal kitchens, specifically potato peeling duty, for 10 years.
The choice.
That night, Damien intercepted Vespera on the balcony. So, he leaned against the railing, swirling a glass of wine. "I saved your life. Again. I believe the going rate for that is a date." He looked at her, his usual smirk softened into something genuine. "Think about it, Vespera. You, me, the throne of the underworld? It would be a non-stop party. No rules, no sun. Just eternal fun." Vespera looked at him. He was charming, dangerous, and exciting. Then she looked into the ballroom, where Lux was awkwardly trying to avoid a conversation about tax codes with a duke, his eyes constantly darting to the balcony to check on her. "Damien," she said softly, "you're fun, but I don't want a party. I want someone who knows I hate parties." Damien sighed dramatically, placing a hand over his heart. "Rejected for the Boy Scout. My ego may never recover. But he's a good man. Boring but good."
He winked.
"If he hurts you, I'll resurrect his grandmother to haunt him." Schemes and crystals. The number of candidates was dwindling. Countess Beatrice, desperate, decided to play dirty. During tea time, Beatrice screamed, pointing at Vespera. "Thief." She stole the queen's ancestral sapphire necklace. "I saw her." Guards rushed forward to search Vespera, but Archmage Pippin hobbled into the room. "Hold," the old wizard croaked. He pulled a crystal ball from his robe. "I have recently invented a new spell. I call it the dashcam of truth." He waved his hand. The crystal projected a holographic video in the center of the room. It clearly showed Beatrice, 5 minutes earlier, looking around shifty-eyed before shoving the necklace down her own cleavage. The court erupted in laughter. Beatrice turned purple and fled. Another candidate, Sophie, watched the whole thing, looked at the chaos, looked at the handsome pastry chef holding a tray of eclairs, and shrugged. "I'm out," she announced, grabbing the chef's arm. "We're going to open a bakery." The fifth trial, the Grotto of Dreams. Only Vespera remained. But she still had to pass the final test. The Grotto of Dreams. She lay on the stone slab, the magic of the cave pulling her consciousness into a deep trance. In the dream, she sat on a throne made of skulls. She wore a crown of black diamonds. The world bowed to her. Damien stood by her side. "Empress Vespera," he said, "the world is yours. You can crush Solaria." Vespera looked at the power. Then she looked at the side table. There was a plate of sandwiches. And sitting on a picnic blanket, reading a book about effective dragon grooming, was Lux. "I don't want the world," Dream Vespera said, standing up. "It sounds exhausting." She walked over to Lux and sat down. "Pass the mustard." Vespera woke up with a gasp. Lux was sitting beside the slab, holding her hand. "I saw your dream," he said softly. The connection allowed shared consciousness. "Then you know," Vespera whispered, looking down. "You know I'm Vespera von Grimm, the enemy princess, the monster's daughter." She waited for the guards. For the arrest. Lux laughed. It was a warm, bright sound. "Vespera, I knew who you were the moment you sneezed a shadow at a troll. A Solarian doesn't sneeze darkness." "You knew? And you let me stay." "I was waiting for you to tell me," he smiled. "Besides, your brother, Vlad, arrived this morning. He's currently in the kitchen with my father, signing a peace treaty and drinking all our ale." The finale, the Fountain of Light. The ceremony of betrothal was held at the Shining Fountain. The water glowed with pure solar energy. Lux took Vespera's hand, ready to announce their engagement. "I object," a voice boomed like thunder. The sky turned black. King Tenebris of Tenebria, Morgana's father, stepped out of a portal. "If my daughter cannot be queen, no one will." He began a dark ritual. Morgana, standing in the crowd, screamed as her body was seized by magic, turning her into a living conduit. Shadows poured out of her mouth, morphing into hundreds of small, chaotic imps. "Attack the fountain," Tenebris commanded. "Corrupt the source." The imps swarmed. Guests panicked. "Not on my watch." A burly man in gray armor, Vespera's brother, Vlad, leaped from the VIP box. He punched a gargoyle in the face and sprinted toward Morgana. "Sorry, sis," he yelled, and delivered a magical slap to the back of Morgana's head.
Whack.
The portal snapped shut.
Morgana blinked, dazed. Ouch.
But the damage was done. The imps had dived into the fountain of light. The water was turning a sickly gray, flickering. The stability of the realm was collapsing. "It's dying," Lux cried, trying to pour light into the water, but it wasn't enough. Vespera looked at the fountain. Light was failing because it had no balance.
It needs contrast, she realized.
"Vespera, don't," Lux yelled. "Oh, to hell with it." Vespera swore and cannonballed into the fountain. She submerged, opening her soul. She grabbed the dying light with one hand and her own inner darkness with the other. She didn't fight them. She forced them to hold hands. The mixing of light and dark. A massive pulse of energy exploded outward. It wasn't blinding white, and it wasn't pitch black. It was a beautiful, shimmering twilight, purple, gold, and deep blue. Vespera's energy drained instantly. She floated to the surface, unconscious. Lux waded in, dragging her wet body to the edge. "Vespera, breathe." She didn't move. Desperate, Lux gathered every ounce of his life magic. He pressed his lips to hers. It wasn't a romantic kiss. It was a transfusion of soul. Gasps from the crowd. Vespera's eyes snapped open. She coughed up sparkling purple water. "Did we win?" she rasped. "Yes," Lux laughed, tears in his eyes. "We won. And you ruined my boots." "Put it on my tab," she smirked before passing out again.
Epilogue.
Vespera woke up in her bedroom, surrounded by flowers. Lux was sitting in a chair, peeling an apple. "The conspirators?" she asked. "Dungeon," Lux replied. "No dessert for a month." "My brother?" "Still drinking with my dad. I think they're planning a bowling league." Suddenly, the window shattered. Toby, Beatrice's idiot brother, vaulted into the room with a dagger. "For the honor of my sister," he yelled. Vespera was too weak to move. Lux reached for his sword, but it was out of reach.
Creak.
The wardrobe door flew open. Count Fint, the fake father, burst out wielding a heavy golden candelabra.
Clang.
He smashed it over Toby's head. Toby crumbled like a sack of potatoes. "Nobody touches my tax deduction."
Fiend shouts it, pensing.
He adjusted his coat. "I mean my daughter." Vespera and Lux looked at each other and burst out laughing. 6 months later. "I'm telling you, midnight blue napkins are sophisticated," Vespera argued, slamming her hand on the table. "They look like bruises," Lux countered. "We need sunburst gold. Gold is tacky. Blue is depressing." They glared at each other across the wedding planning table. Then, simultaneously, they grabbed a sandwich from the platter between them, took a bite, and smiled. "Let's just go with purple," they said in unison.